After that award night, something inside me shifted. I didn't say anything to Daniel. I didn't know how to begin. How do you tell the person you love that you feel invisible in their success? The next morning, he woke up cheerful, humming. As he got ready for work, he held up his trophy and said, "Can you believe it, Leela? All those years of struggle finally paid off." I smiled faintly. Yes, they did. He didn't notice my voice tremble. He never noticed things like that anymore. Over breakfast, he told me about all the calls he had received, investors, journalists, friends from years ago. He said, "It feels like everyone suddenly remembers me." I wanted to say, "Except me," but the words never came out. So I just poured his tea, as I always did, and listened. That week was busy for him. He was invited to interviews, dinners, and networking events. Every time he left the house, he looked sharper, new suit, new cologne. He started talking about expanding internationally. I used to love hearing his plans. Now, they sounded like someone else's story. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at him while he spoke, searching for the man who once used to look at me like I was part of his dream. But that man seemed lost somewhere behind all the achievements. Mia noticed the distance too. One evening, she came into the kitchen while I was making soup. She leaned against the counter and said softly, "Dad's been really busy lately." I nodded. "He has a lot on his plate." She hesitated. "You've been quiet too." I stirred the pot slowly. "Just tired, sweetheart." She watched me for a moment. Then she said, "You don't have to keep pretending you're okay." I smiled sadly. Mothers are good at pretending, Mia. She walked over and hugged me. For a moment, I felt seen again. Weeks turned into months. Daniel's company grew bigger than ever. He hired assistants, managers, and consultants. He spent more time with them than with us. Sometimes I'd wait up for him, but he'd come home past midnight. I'd hear the car door, the footsteps, the quiet creak of the front door. Then he'd whisper, "You didn't have to wait." And I'd whisper back, "I wasn't," but we both knew I was. One night, he came home late again. I was sitting by the window, knitting something to fill the silence. He looked tired but content. "Big day tomorrow," he said. "We're pitching a new project to the city council." I nodded. "I'll make you breakfast early then." He smiled distractedly. "Thanks, Leela. You always take care of everything." It should have felt nice to hear that, but it sounded more like a habit than gratitude. The next morning, as he rushed out the door, he couldn't find his presentation file. He searched frantically, muttering under his breath. I walked over, opened the drawer, and handed it to him. He looked surprised. "You found it?" I nodded. "It was right where you left it." He sighed with relief. "You're a lifesaver." Then he kissed my forehead quickly and left. I stood there in the quiet house, the echo of that rushed kiss lingering like a memory of something that used to mean more. A few days later, I found an old photo album while cleaning. Inside were pictures from our early years, Daniel standing proudly beside his first construction site, me holding baby Mia, our small rented room with cracked walls. I sat on the floor, tracing my fingers over the faded pictures. We looked so happy back then, not because we had everything, but because we had each other. I wondered when exactly we stopped being a team. When did I become just a background of his story? That evening, when he came home, I tried to talk. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you remember this?" I held up one of the old pictures. He looked at it briefly. "Oh, wow. That feels like a lifetime ago." "It does," I said. "We went through a lot back then." He nodded. "Yeah, but it was worth it. Look where we are now." I wanted to say, "Where are we, Daniel?" because I can't find us anymore. But instead, I smiled weakly and put the photo away. He didn't notice the tears that slipped down when I turned away. Slowly, I started spending more time alone. I began volunteering at a local shelter, cooking meals, teaching women simple health lessons. It gave me purpose again, a small place where my effort mattered. The women there would smile and say, "Thank you, ma'am," and those two words filled a space in me that had been empty for years. When Daniel asked where I went, I said, "Just somewhere I feel useful." He nodded absently, scrolling through his phone. "That's good." He didn't ask more. Then one weekend, Mia came home from college. She had brought her boyfriend, Adam, a polite, soft-spoken young man. During dinner, Daniel was distracted as usual, replying to work messages. Mia tried to start a conversation. Dad, did you know Adam's studying architecture? Daniel looked up briefly. Oh, nice. Big dreams, huh? Adam smiled. Yes, sir. I hope to start my own firm someday. Daniel nodded proudly. That's the spirit. You remind me of myself when I was young. Mia glanced at me, then said gently, You had Mom beside you then. Daniel laughed lightly. Yes, your mother was very patient with me. Then he went back to his phone. The room fell silent for a moment. I saw Mia's expression hurt, but quiet, just like mine. After dinner, she hugged me tightly before leaving. She whispered, Don't let him forget again, Mom. But how do you remind someone of what they no longer see? The next few months passed in quiet repetition. He grew busier. I grew quieter. Sometimes I'd hear him talk on the phone, full of energy and laughter. But when he spoke to me, his voice was softer, almost tired. Once, I asked him, Do you ever miss the old days? He smiled faintly. Not really. We struggled too much back then. I wanted to say, but we were happy then. I didn't. One evening, I overheard him talking to a friend on the phone. He was discussing his early days, how he built the company from scratch. He said, It was all hard work and determination. I just kept pushing myself. He didn't mention me. Not once. Not the nights I stayed awake to help him calculate expenses. Not the meals I skipped so we could save. Not the gold bangles I sold to buy his tools. It wasn't pride I felt in that moment. It was emptiness. That night, when he came to bed, I was already pretending to sleep. He sighed, turned off the light, and lay down beside me. I could hear his steady breathing. I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, Maybe he didn't forget on purpose. Maybe success just made him forget where it started. A few days later, Daniel asked me to join him for a company dinner. He said, It'll be nice if you come. The wives will be there. I agreed. Maybe it would be good to be part of his world. Again, at the dinner, I felt out of place. The women were dressed elegantly, their words polished. They talked about vacations, designers, and charity galas. One of them smiled politely at me and asked, So, Mrs. Fernandez, what do you do? I hesitated. I used to work at a clinic. Now I mostly help at a local shelter. Her smile faltered slightly. Oh, that's nice. Then she turned to someone else. I felt small, like I didn't belong, not even beside the man whose dreams I once carried. When we got home that night, Daniel said, I'm glad you came. Everyone liked you. I smiled faintly. Did they? He nodded absently, loosening his tie. You should come more often. It looks good when we're both there. When we're both there. Not together. Just there. I didn't say anything. But in my heart, something quietly cracked. Soft violin music fades in melancholic yet gentle. I started keeping a journal after that, a place to write down what I couldn't say out loud. Little things, like he forgot to look up when I spoke. Or he said thank you, but his eyes were somewhere else. Each page became a whisper of all the things I wanted him to hear. I didn't write out of anger. I wrote to remember myself. Sometimes, I'd find him asleep on the couch, laptop still open. I'd cover him with a blanket, stand there for a moment, and whisper, You're welcome, Daniel, for everything you've forgotten. He never heard it, but I needed to say it anyway. That's how the distance between us grew, not through arguments or betrayal, but through silence, neglect, and the slow fading of gratitude. Love, I learned, doesn't die loudly. It disappears in quiet moments when one person stops being seen, and I was disappearing. There's a moment in every long silence when something small finally breaks it. For me, it began with a phone call. It was a Thursday morning. The sun was warm, the house still quiet. I was watering the plants when Daniel's assistant called. Her voice was polite. Mrs. Fernandez, just letting you know, we'll be heading to the foundation dinner tonight. Mr. Fernandez wanted me to confirm your RSVP. I paused. Dinner? Yes, she said. The one you helped organize last year. It's being hosted in your husband's honor this time. I smiled faintly. Oh, I didn't know. I'm sorry, ma'am, she replied softly. He must have forgotten to tell you. I thanked her, hung up, and stood there, holding the phone in my hand. He had forgotten. Again, this time, it wasn't just a dinner. It was our foundation. The one we had started together years ago to help workers' families. But now, it was just his. When Daniel came home that evening, I was sitting on the couch. He looked surprised to see me dressed. Oh, he said, "You're ready." Good. I smiled calmly. I wasn't sure if I was invited. He frowned. Of course you are. Why would you say that? I wanted to tell him that even if I was invited, I hadn't felt included in a long time. But instead, I just said, never mind. Let's go. The hall was beautiful, chandeliers glowing, soft music playing. People greeted Daniel warmly, calling him by name, shaking his hand. Some nodded at me politely, like I was a shadow attached to his side. When we sat down at our table, Daniel leaned toward a group of investors, talking animatedly. I watched him, confident, charming, the man everyone admired. I should have been proud, but all I felt was distance. When it was time for him to speak, he walked up to the podium. He looked around, smiling. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This foundation means a lot to me. To me. He talked about how the idea began, how he saw the struggles of workers and wanted to help. But that wasn't how it happened. I remembered the day I'd suggested it. He had come home upset after a worker's accident. I had said softly, "Maybe we can do something for their families, Daniel. Something lasting." He'd looked at me, eyes bright, and said, "You're right, Leela. We'll start something together." And now, as he spoke, he told the story like it had been his alone. He said, "It all started with a dream I had to give back." My hands went cold. It wasn't anger. It was sorrow, deep, quiet sorrow. When the speech ended, the applause was loud. Cameras flashed again. Daniel smiled, shaking hands, taking photos. Someone handed him a bouquet of flowers. He handed it to me absently without looking. That was when I decided I couldn't keep standing beside him like a ghost anymore. The next morning, I didn't make breakfast. I didn't iron his shirt. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window. When Daniel came downstairs, he looked confused. "You're not ready?" I said softly. "No, I'm staying home today." He frowned. "Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "No, Daniel, everything's not okay." He blinked, surprised by the calm in my voice. "What do you mean?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "You forgot me." He stared, unsure how to respond. "Leela, what are you talking about? You're here every day." I nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm here. That's all. I've been here. But not seen, not remembered, not thanked. Just here." He looked genuinely confused, like I was speaking a language he'd forgotten. "Leela, you know how busy I've been." I cut him off gently. "It's not about being busy. It's about being forgotten." He fell silent for a moment. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. Then I said quietly, "Do you remember when I sold my bangles for your tools?" He frowned, trying to recall. "I think so." "Do you remember our first anniversary? The dinner I made?" He looked down. "Leela, do you remember whose idea the foundation was?" He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to forget." I nodded. "I know. You just did." He sat down across from me, rubbing his forehead. "You've always been my strength, Leela. You know that." I smiled sadly. "Then why do I feel so invisible?" He didn't have an answer. For the next few days, we barely spoke. He went to work. I went to the shelter. The silence between us wasn't angry, it was heavy. Like a wall neither of us knew how to climb. But sometimes, silence is what finally forces truth to echo. A week later, I came home early from the shelter. The house was unusually quiet. I saw Daniel sitting in the living room, holding something, my old journal. My heart stopped. I had left it on the table that morning by mistake. He looked up at me. His eyes were red. "You wrote all this?" he asked softly. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes." I didn't know how else to speak. He held the pages gently, his fingers trembling. "You wrote about every moment I forgot you. I stood there, not sure whether to take it or let him keep reading. He said quietly, I didn't know you felt this way. That's the point, Daniel, I whispered. You didn't know. He covered his face with his hands, and for a long time, we both sat in silence. Then, in a voice that cracked, he said, I thought I was building something for us. You were, I said, but somewhere along the way, you built walls instead of a home. That night, for the first time in years, he didn't go to his office after dinner. He just sat beside me on the porch. The air was cool, the crickets faint in the distance. He said softly, I don't know how to fix what I broke. I looked at him, tired, remorseful, finally present. You can start by remembering, I said, not just what I did, but who we were. He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. I want to try. The days that followed were quiet, but different. He started asking questions again, small ones, but they mattered. Did you eat? How was your day? Tell me about the shelter. Each question felt like a small step toward me, but forgiveness isn't instant. It's slow, like healing. Sometimes I'd still feel that ache, the memory of being unseen. He noticed it once and said, I wish I could go back. I smiled faintly. You can't go back, Daniel. You can only remember better next time. Then came the moment that truly changed everything. It was the Foundation's next community event. Daniel had asked me to come. I almost said no, but something in his eyes made me agree. When we arrived, the crowd gathered as usual. Daniel went up to the stage again. I braced myself, ready to hear another speech that forgot my name, but this time, he looked different, calmer, a little humbled. He began, Tonight, before anything else, I need to correct a story I've been telling wrong for years. The audience went quiet. He glanced at me, then said, This foundation didn't start with me. It started with my wife, Leela. When I saw the struggles of my workers, I wanted to help, but it was her who said we should do something lasting. She believed in me before anyone else did. She built these dreams with her own sacrifices. And I forgot to say thank you. His voice broke slightly. So tonight, I want to say it. Thank you, Leela, for everything I forgot. I felt the tears before I even realized I was crying. The applause that followed wasn't for the business or the success, it was for the truth. And in that moment, I didn't feel invisible anymore. After the event, he came to me and held my hand tightly. I should have said it long ago, he whispered. I smiled through my tears. You just did. That night, as we drove home, the silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that heals. After that night, the air between us changed. It didn't happen suddenly. He didn't wake up a new man. And I didn't forget the years I'd felt unseen. But there was a calmness between us, a willingness to listen again. Sometimes that's all healing needs. Space to begin. The next morning, Daniel made tea. It was awkward at first. He used too much sugar, spilled a little on the counter. But he brought the cup to me and said, It's not perfect, but I wanted to try. I smiled. Neither are we. He laughed quietly, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in years, soft, embarrassed, real. Over the weeks that followed, we began to find each other again in small ways. He started coming home earlier. He'd sit with me on the porch, sometimes not saying much at all. We'd just watch the evening sky fade from gold to gray. 81st, I thought it was silence again, but then I realized this was a different kind of quiet, not distance, peace. One evening, he brought out the old photo album I'd shown him months before. He set it on the table and said, Tell me about these again, Leela. So I did. I told him about our first rented room, about the peeling paint and the cracked floor, about the time we couldn't afford candles and ate dinner in the dark, laughing anyway, about the first wall he ever built, and how proud he was even though it leaned a little. He listened like every word mattered. Every once in a while, he'd reach out and touch a picture, smiling softly. I'd forgotten how young we were, he said. You were dreaming, I replied, and I was holding the ladder. He looked at me, then really looked, and whispered, You still are. I didn't forgive him all at once. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't a single act. It's a choice you make every morning when you look at someone and remember that love once lived there and can live there again. Some days, the old pain came back quietly, like a shadow. When it did, I'd go for a walk through the garden behind our house. The same garden where I used to plant flowers alone. Now, sometimes he followed. One afternoon, as we planted marigolds, Daniel said, "You know, I used to think success was about how many people knew my name." I glanced up. "And now," he smiled faintly, "now I think it's about the one person who says my name when no one else is listening." At the shelter, people began to notice him visiting with me. He started helping quietly, no press, no photographers. He'd fix a broken door, bring supplies, talk to the workers. When someone thanked him, he always said, "Thank her. She started this." It wasn't about credit anymore. It was about connection. One afternoon, Mia came home. She found us sitting together in the living room, surrounded by old blueprints and photographs. She smiled and said, "What's going on here?" Daniel grinned. "Your mother's showing me all the projects I used to think were mine." Mia laughed. Finally, then she looked at me and mouthed a single word, "Happy?" I nodded. I was. That night, after Mia went to bed, Daniel turned to me and said, "I don't deserve how patient you've been." I shook my head. "You don't have to earn forgiveness. You just have to live it." He reached for my hand and said, "Then I'll spend the rest of my life remembering." And I believed him. We began to rebuild our home, not the walls, but the rhythm of it. Morning tea together, evening walks, simple routines we'd forgotten in the noise of achievement. Sometimes he'd tell me about his meetings or new projects, and then he'd stop mid-sentence and ask, "What do you think, Leela?" The first time he did that, I almost cried, because for the first time in so long, he wanted my voice again. Months later, Daniel decided to start a new program through the foundation, one to support the wives and mothers of workers. He asked me to lead it. I hesitated. "Me?" He smiled. "It began with you, remember? It's only right it continues with you." Standing on that stage, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, belonging. Not as someone's wife, but as myself. When I spoke, I didn't talk about pain. I talked about remembering the quiet power of being seen again. And when the applause came, I looked at Daniel. He wasn't in the spotlight. He was standing beside it, watching me with pride in his eyes. Later that night, as we walked home, he said softly, "You were incredible." I smiled. "You didn't forget my name this time." He laughed. "I never will again." We stopped at the garden gate, the moonlight falling across our faces. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I whispered, "We lost so much time, Daniel." He nodded. "Maybe, but we found the truth in the time we have left." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "That's enough." Sometimes I think about that first award night, the one where he forgot me. It used to hurt just remembering it. Now, it feels like a chapter we had to live to reach this one, because sometimes forgetting teaches us how to truly remember. When people ask us how we've stayed married so long, Daniel always smiles and says, "Because she never stopped believing in me." And I add quietly, "And because he finally started believing in us." We both laugh, not because everything is perfect, but because we finally understand what being together really means. A few weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, he brought out 2 cups of tea and sat beside me on the porch. The air smelled of rain and soil. He said, "You know, Leela, I used to think success was what I could hold in my hands. Now I think it's what I can hold beside me." I smiled. "And what's that?" He looked at me, eyes soft. "You." The kettle whistled faintly inside, but neither of us moved. We just sat there, letting the warmth of the tea and the silence wrap around us. I learned that love isn't about never being forgotten. It's about being remembered when it matters most. And sometimes, people don't forget because they stop caring. They forget because life becomes loud, and gratitude becomes quiet. All it takes is one moment of truth to bring the sound back. That was our moment. It has been 2 years since that night when Daniel stood on stage and finally said my name. Life looks quieter now. Not smaller, just simpler. We still wake up before sunrise. He brews the tea. I slice the fruit. And sometimes while he hums under his breath, I think about how easy it is to lose someone in the noise of ambition, and how precious it is to find them again in ordinary mornings. Daniel still works, but differently now. He lets his younger managers take the spotlight. He spends more time mentoring than chasing. He tells them, success means nothing if the people beside you stop smiling. When he says that, he always glances at me, and I see a quiet promise in his eyes, a reminder that he still remembers. Sometimes we visit the shelter together. The women there call me Miss Leela, and they still thank me for small things. But lately they thank him too. And when they do, he shakes his head and says, thank her first. There's something healing about those words. Not because I need the credit, but because they mean he understands now the power of being seen. Mia got married last spring. At the wedding, she asked her father to speak. Daniel stood up, holding the microphone with both hands, and said, I used to think I was the man who built everything. Then I realized I was just the man who was helped to build. He looked at me and smiled. If you're lucky enough to find someone who believes in you, never let them fade into the background. The hall went silent, and for a moment, I felt proud, not of him, not of myself, but of what we'd learned together. After the guests left, Daniel and I stayed behind, picking up the flower petals scattered on the floor. He said softly, you know, Leela, I never deserved how steady you were. I smiled. You didn't need to. You just had to see it. He nodded, slipping an arm around my shoulder. Then let me keep seeing, and we walked out into the warm night, hand in hand. There are still moments when he forgets small things, where he put his keys, the name of a new employee, what day of the week it is. But he never forgets to say thank you. Sometimes he says it without a reason, just quietly across the table. Thank you for staying. I used to think those words were small. Now I know they're everything. One afternoon, I found a letter on my pillow. It was written in Daniel's careful handwriting. Leela, I can't undo the years I didn't see you, but every day that's left, I want to make sure you know you were never in the background. You were the ground I stood on. I once built houses and bridges. You built me. I folded the letter and kept it in my bedside drawer, not as proof of apology, but as a reminder that even the most silent hearts can learn to speak again. When I tell this story now to the women at the shelter, or to young couples who visit the foundation, I always begin the same way. Love is not about how loudly someone praises you, but how quietly they stand beside you when the lights go out. Because that's what we both forgot for a while. We chased brightness and lost sight of the glow that was already there. Sometimes in the evenings, Daniel and I sit outside watching the workers leave the construction site nearby. Their clothes are dusty, their steps heavy, but when they reach the gate, they smile. And Daniel always says, that was me once. I always answer, and I was waiting for you at home. He'll laugh softly and say, you still are. I think about the girl I was when we began, hopeful, willing, sure that love was measured in sacrifice. And I think about the woman I am now, a little older, still hopeful, but wiser enough to know that love must also be seen. If I could speak to that younger version of me, I'd tell her, don't disappear while holding someone else's dream. You are part of it. Because building someone's dream should never mean losing yourself in the process. Sometimes I catch Daniel watching me while I read or tend to the plants. When our eyes meet, he doesn't look away. He smiles, a small, grateful smile that says more than any grand gesture ever could. We don't talk about the years we lost anymore. We live the ones we have. Every so often, people write letters to the foundation. One woman sent a note that said, my husband works too much. I feel invisible. What should I do? I wrote back, don't shout to be seen. Speak softly, but truthfully. Sometimes the heart hears better in quiet. And when he finally remembers, let forgiveness be your answer, not pride. When I sealed that envelope, I realized I wasn't just writing to her. I was writing to the woman I used to be. Now, when Daniel receives recognition or awards, he always brings me onto the stage first. He doesn't make a speech. He simply holds my hand and says, we built this together. And every time he does, I feel that same warmth I felt in the beginning, the one that had almost disappeared but never truly died. Because love, when it's real, survives even through forgetting. It waits quietly until someone decides to remember. We are older now. There are lines on our faces, silver in our hair. But there's also peace, the kind that comes only after storms have passed and left something clean behind. Sometimes we sit on the porch in silence, watching the sky. Daniel will reach for my hand without looking, and I'll squeeze his back. No words, no explanations, just presence. That, I've learned, is what love becomes when it grows up. Not passion or perfection, just quiet, steady remembering. I once thought the saddest thing in the world was to be forgotten by the person you love. Now I know the saddest thing is to forget yourself while waiting to be remembered. And the most beautiful thing is to find both again together. If you ever find yourself where I was, standing beside someone who has forgotten your part in their story, don't lose your kindness. Speak your truth, but keep your heart gentle. People can forget, yes, but they can also learn, change, and return. And when they do, don't greet them with anger. Greet them with the same warmth that made them fall in love with you in the first place, because sometimes remembering begins with grace. When I look at Daniel now, I don't see the man who forgot me. I see the man who finally learned to see me, and that is enough.